I would like to weave together several groups of thoughts and show how they resonate with each other. The first are the developmental and epistemological postures of Freud and Piaget. Their discoveries about how the mind/brain works and their sensitivity to error, slips of the lip with Freud, and the deep errors of cognition with Piaget. And then next are the insights of mathematics and physics stemming from the scientific revolution of 500 years ago from Galileo, Newton, Leibniz, to Einstein. I see Gödel, all of them, and of course many others, engaged in the processes of building metaphors and about how the universe works, and using erring to correct misconceptions and create further metaphors in our conscious and unconscious understanding of how things work. Today I will use the above to show how psychohistory reveals the understanding of happenings to humans and the role of our minds/brains in what happens. With regard to psychohistory, the consequences of the scientific revolution and the logical results of Bertrand Russell and Kurt Gödel and the psychological postures of the participants in history are how they create frameworks in which wars become increasingly apparent, that a deep and proper understanding of the present time, the past, and a sense of what the future may bring requires a keen historical sensibility concerning how people, nations, and institutions function, coupled with the deeper insight into the mind/brain that the 21st century revolution in psychology and neurophysiology of humans yields. That is, psychohistory based on the phenomenological work and insights of Freud and Piaget, with their mistakes and errors clarified by our present understanding of the mind-brain, will give us a new understanding of history, understand how human affairs, war and peace play out. Historians generally take a phenomenological approach with data based in time and space, geography and storyline, involving kingdoms, human laws, governments, religions, the past, the present, and the prognosticated future. Accessing our 21st century understanding of minds and brains will importantly and additionally allow the perspectives of Freud and Piaget, psychology and neuropsychology to deepen our knowledge, our insight, our understanding of human affairs. Thus, we will bring psychological proposals of Freud and Piaget during the 20th century, their Gedanken experiments and understandings Did you
Sorry,
want,
what are
you know,
Gedanken?
the Gedanken, yeah, it's good. Well, the word Gedanken means thought in German and Yiddish, okay? I put the two languages together because they are very much overlapping, and it's very germane that they're together. Usually it's attributed to physical thought, the physicist science. You think of a possible state of affairs, like here, for example, very all over the place. They think of, well, maybe, is this so or not? I don't know. Well, then they say, well, here's what it says. Let's try it out. There's the empirical validation. Now, it turns out, interestingly, that the final empirical validation of what Einstein was doing when he got his relativity equations and how time changed took many years after his Gedanken experiment. The psychological proposals of Freud and Piaget during the 20th century, their Gedanken experiments and understandings of the mind-brain function of individuals can now, in the 21st century, be tested and probed by our growing insights of mind-brain activity using functional MRI and other neurophysiological probing techniques. We may now probe and explore the mind-brain to determine the validity of Freud's ideas concerning the id, the ego, the superego, and to deepen our understanding of them and where they may not even be valid. That's some of the questions of today. Assessing Freud's developmental ideas concerning number, cognition, and logic can now be done using our deepened beliefs concerning our estimates of the future. By knowing what people were capable of understanding and how that affected what they did. For example, people's tendency toward egocentric thinking deterred the development of the understanding of a heliocentric solar system, of psychoanalysis and history in H. Stuart Hughes's History as Art and Science, where he shows in a number of cases that a Freudian perspective deeply illuminates history. The mind of Freud and psychoanalysis today, by today's insights in the mind, brain, and neurophysiology, using MRI-based investigations. How can we probe Freud's phenomenological psychology of the id, ego, and superego in the mind-brain? Where and how are they manifested in the geography of the brain? How do the Oedipus/Electra complexes manifest themselves in children and adult mind brains? Consider Freud's understanding of Shakespeare's Hamlet's equivocations as manifesting an Oedipal problem. We would then have a literary analysis rooted in a psychoanalytic understanding. This thinking of the King of Denmark and Hamlet as potentially historical personages could be understood as psychohistory. The beginnings of such MRI investigations can be found in the New York Times. Some ideas are now introduced to people And we now know where some of these ideas literally take place. They can follow the ideas, showing that some of the MRI and other devices that they use. An interesting aspect of Piaget's cognitive theory is that he tried to effect a connection between his cognitive analysis and Freud's psychoanalysis. That's a little known thing. I came across a paper of Piaget in this regard. He also worked in his younger days in Binet's laboratory in Paris, where IQ testing of children was being established. Piaget became particularly struck by the question of why children made errors. That is, not only what they knew, which is what Binet was interested in, what intelligence did they manifest. He wanted to know, Piaget, why did they not know these things? Very keen insight. Why they made mistakes. This led Piaget to the studying of knowing processes as developmental things, and knowing and erring as developmental processes. I say, Robert Kalachowski deals with these processes. In Freud's case, Piaget's understanding of such things was phenomenological. How did children talk about what they knew or believed? And how did they act on what they knew? Both Freud and Piaget knew that the mind, brain, and neurophysiology were there, but it was only in today's revolutionary insights, that is over the past 25 years, that our insights derived from their understanding and their own errors, using MRI-type analyses, began to uncover where and how our thinking takes place. Piaget's phenomenological analyses of the growth of logical thinking and the younger child's trial and error analyses concerning how one balances on a seesaw, understanding the logic of class inclusion and the development of the logic of implicative reasoning can now be probed in today's MRI-type investigations, where and how children's discoveries concerning distance and weight to achieve balance are manifested in the brain, where and how class inclusions are understood by children in various Piaget experiments, and where and how the child's mind-brain develops in the younger child, how it changes and eventuates in the adolescent understanding of logic and implicative reasoning. All these things are now being studied today. In the following, I will show how psychohistory illuminates historical phenomena. Inside our brains, we expect retaliation for aggression. This is built on the original investigations by Freud and others. This is a built-in tendency which may be manifested by all humans, but it is also a Gedanken experiment that requires empirical neurophysiological validation. That is, do we have this expectation of retaliation for aggression? Freud accepted it, the so-called Talion principle, Italian, that's from the Latin, like to retaliate, T-A-L, tal. In his theory of psychoanalysis, he believed, for example, it was the reason that many voyeurs, people who can only see things and don't do things, are troubled by the fantasy that they will go blind. These are phenomenological things. Isn't that interesting? In traditional, historical, and contemporary historical analysis, the lack of such understanding is manifest on our news broadcasts these days when terror activities of ISIS, Hamas, and Al-Qaeda are analyzed. Now, are all involved in what takes place in our world. This is very subtle stuff that you have to expound on, and just a couple of sentences, I'll give some kind of insight to what I think is very relevant